I'm still haunted by my old memories of an ex-boyfriend I dated for only a few months. We met online and lived an hour apart, but we clicked very fast and started seeing each other regularly. Things were going great for about a month, and one day we stopped at my place so I could pack some clothes to go stay at his place for the weekend. We walked into my bedroom, and as I started packing my belongings, I noticed him scanning around my room with his eyes. After a few awkward moments of silence, he began to ask me some very specific and eerily detailed questions. Do you ever move your pillow to the foot of your bed at night and pull your blinds all the way up so you can see the stars out of this window over here before you go to sleep? I bet you use this lamp over here the most. It's the only one that I'd use. I was frozen in shock. I just stood there speechless, looking at him in disbelief. He just described everything I did the night before, and it was the only time I ever rolled up my blinds at night and laid at the opposite end of my bed to look up at the stars in the sky. I told nobody about that, so how the hell did he know? The only thing I could do next was to laugh it off and ask him how he knew, but he just kind of shrugged it off and changed the subject. I couldn't stop thinking about it the whole weekend, though, wondering if he had been watching me. I hid my paranoia as best I could until I got home, but I then did a deep sweep of my entire bedroom looking for any sign of hidden cameras. I found nothing. I didn't have any laptops, computers, TV, or security cameras in my bedroom that he could have hacked to spy on me with. I did have my mobile phone in the room, but it was laying flat on my nightstand that night. If he was physically stalking me, it would have been difficult for him to see into my bedroom as my room was pretty high up. He would have had to watch further away from the forest, and even if that was the case, there were some large trees in my backyard that would have blocked his view. It just didn't make any sense, and it still doesn't make sense to me. I tried to pass this off as coincidence, but when I stepped back and looked at the whole picture, there was something not right about him. I vividly recalled the first time I ever spoke to him on the phone before we met, and we had so much in common, almost too much in common. From books we were reading to very specific interests, hobbies, and habits, I thought I met my soulmate. Nobody has ever made me feel so alive. He swept me off my feet, only to drop me from what I thought was heaven. He became a different person seemingly overnight. He was a narcissist, and I watched his mask fall off. We had texted on and off for a few years after, but I've since gone to no contact. I will probably never know the hows and whys, but I continue to wonder and look over my shoulder. Where's Mama? She was 4 years old now, not out of the baby talk phase. Mama's at home, sweetie, I said, giving her little hand a gentle squeeze. I feel hurty again. I know, you're sick, sweetie, but it won't hurt much longer, I promise. Okay, but how much longer? Only 15 minutes more, not long, I replied as we continued along a dusty dirt road. I felt awful making her walk so far. The cancer was eating up her insides by now. It was amazing she could even walk at all. Then I saw it, a small cottage set among the trees. We're here. I'm scared, she replied. Me too. I walked her up the cracked paving slabs of the garden path. It was then I saw the flies, hundreds of them, their faint buzzing building into a crescendo hum as they crawled all over the structure. Shouldn't we knock? She asked innocently as we reached the front door. No, we don't have to. Not here. Inside, sat in front of a roaring hearth, was an old woman. A roaring fire, yet I saw no smoke billowing from the chimney on our approach. I know why you're here, she croaked, taking out a small leather-bound wallet. It contained surgical equipment. I don't like her, came the infant voice next to me. I shot her a look, silently chastising her rudeness. She groaned before speaking again. Where's Mama? I told you, sweetie. Mommy's at home. I know, but where's Daddy? I shuddered. No more questions now. It's time. We took a few steps towards the old woman. Such innocence, needlessly afflicted, she rasped. I couldn't see her face, but I could hear the smile on her voice. She doesn't have long left, I said, my voice cracking up. Please help me. Then give her here. The girl looked up at her with pleading eyes, but still I pushed her towards the old woman. She took the little girl by the hand, whispered a few words over her, then reached into the wallet of surgical tools. Then, with one swift motion, she brought the blade of a scalp across her throat. I couldn't watch, not as she held the girl as the blood drained from her tiny body. Not as she cut off the parts she needed and ground them into mush in an old pestle and mortar. When she was done, she clicked her fingers. Drink. I took the stone bowl in my hands, brought it to my lips, and did as I was told. I don't feel anything anymore. Not the pain of childhood abuse, nor the longing for the family. I lost the gun-obsessed loner who decided to go out with a bang. Not even the guilt of abducting a little girl from a family that loved her, even if she was doomed to die young. I don't feel a fucking thing anymore. And I love it. When I was a freshman in high school, Alyssa was my role model. Alyssa was a senior. She was so gorgeous, confident, smart, effortlessly stylish, and always owning the room. Back then, I was too shy to talk to her. Seniors are already pretty intimidating to freshmen, but Alyssa was next level intimidating because she was such a queen. I didn't expect anyone to see me the way that I saw Alyssa, but I was pleasantly surprised in my senior year. And in my senior year, I started finding cute little notes in my locker. I wasn't expecting that at all, but I was really flattered. The first one said, "You were beautiful in that dress on Friday." The handwriting was neat and simple with a cute little heart at the end. More notes kept coming in, always in fourth period too, and I got a note every week or two. I know they came during fourth period because I checked my locker before and after every class, and they were all very sweet, and they said things like, "Your smile lights up the hallway. You shine brighter than any star. Your homecoming photos are straight out of a magazine cover. So stunning." There were more notes that I don't remember. They weren't romantic or flirty, and they looked like things that I might have said to Alyssa if we'd ever spoken. I thought maybe they were from a shy underclassman girl, and I had my suspicions. I didn't tell anyone about the notes, though. I really didn't want my friends turning this into an investigation and embarrassing whoever was leaving them. And whoever was leaving these messages, I genuinely thought they meant well. Then in the second semester, my schedule changed. My last class of the day was upstairs near my friend's locker. My friend's last class was near my locker, and we swapped lockers. I forgot all about the notes until my 18th birthday. And that morning, my friend handed me a note that she found in my old locker, and it said, "Happy birthday, princess." At first, she thought the notes were meant for her since any of those compliments could fit her too. But when she realized that the birthday didn't match up, she put two and two together. And come to think of it, I don't think any of the notes ever said my name. I admitted that the notes had been happening all year, and I explained that I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. Then my friends launched their investigation that I had been worried about. All the girls in our friend group became detectives trying to solve this little mystery. And one friend, who didn't have a fourth period class, stationed herself by the lockers to survey that area. And it worked. The notes weren't from a shy freshman or even from a boy. They were from a janitor, An older woman none of us knew. We all recognized her, but I don't think any of us had ever talked to her. She'd been leaving these notes for several months, watching me closely enough to comment on my outfits, field hockey games, and even what I posted on Facebook. I saw her at the last field hockey game of the season. She sat quietly in the stands. That was the only time that I noticed her watching me, but I have no idea how I didn't notice her watching me before. None of us brought this up to her, and she hadn't done anything technically wrong. But it all felt so unsettling in a way that's very hard to explain. My name's Stephanie, I'm in my 30s, and I'm from Pasadena, California. I only mention that because, as a listener, I find it super annoying when people don't make it clear who they are at the start of their stories. In the spring of late 2017, I've been living with a girl named Lyra for 2 years, and she was easily one of the most chill roommates I'd ever had. We'd met through a friend of a friend when I first moved to Pasadena, and I was desperate for a place to stay. Lyra had a spare room and a rent that she couldn't cover alone, so we made it work. At 26, she was only a year older than me, but she had this sort of worldliness and maturity that made our cramped 2-bedroom apartment feel more like a home. She was an artist in her spare time, and she was a good one too. She was always drawing things in her little sketchbook, birds or vines or pretty spiraling shapes, and she was just as creative when it came to home decor. She wasn't a huge party animal either, which was nice because my job at a coffee shop involved waking up at 5:30 in the morning, and I'd keep the coffee pot warm for her in the morning before I headed to work. It was simple, comfortable, like we'd figured out some unspoken rhythm. Then one day, in April of 2017, she sat me down at her kitchen table and told me that she was going to Bolivia for 2 weeks. Her eyes had this spark about them as she mentioned something called an ayahuasca retreat, like she was already halfway there. I didn't know what ayahuasca was at the time. It sounded like some kind of yoga thing, so I just sort of smiled and said it sounded amazing. Then, around a week later, she packed her things and off she went. I wished her safe travels, waved from the window, and figured that she'd return with some epic stories and maybe a kooky souvenir or two. That night, I was alone in the apartment and I googled ayahuasca and learned it was a kind of hallucinogenic tea used in rituals down in places like Peru or Brazil. People drank it with shamans, puked their guts out, and then saw visions of gods or demons or whatever else lurked inside their minds. Users claimed it was supposed to crack you open or release your soul among dozens of other very grandiose statements. And that wasn't my kind of scene. I liked my reality unscrambled and my feet planted very solid on the ground. But for Lyra, it must have sounded like the adventure of a lifetime. She was the spiritual one, always chasing something deeper with stuff like medication, apps, tarot cards, or the cluster of quartz crystals that she kept on the windowsill. And I went to bed imagining her coming back with a tan and some crazy tale about talking to a jaguar spirit. I kept the apartment running for her 2-week absence, and then when she came back, I was ready to hear everything. Lyra texted me saying that she was about to catch a cab home from the airport, and then about an hour later, the door creaked open and she stepped inside with her bag slung over one shoulder. I'd expected her to return looking relaxed and refreshed with obviously a nice healthy tan, and instead, her hair was a tangled, unwashed mess, and her skin looked chalky, like the sun hadn't touched her for the whole 2 weeks. When I asked her if she had fun, she didn't even smile. Lyra dropped the bag by the door and then looked at me, except it didn't feel like she was looking at me, more like through me or past me. In this flat, distant voice, she simply said it was intense, and then she shuffled to her room and closed the door behind her. And that was the first sign that something was clearly off. Lyra had always been very sociable, The kind of person who'd flop down next to me and ramble on about her shift at the bookstore or the new sketch that she was working on. But after her trip to Bolivia, she seemed distant, and I told myself it was exhaustion or jet lag or something like that. But after another Google search, I discovered that the retreat might have been rougher than expected, and I read about the purging, the vomiting, and the hours upon hours of feeling like your mind was unspooling, and then thought, geez, no wonder she's acting so shell-shocked. She probably just needed time to settle in, so I figured that I'd give her the space that she needed, but time didn't seem to fix anything. A week passed, but Lyra didn't snap back. She got super quiet, like she didn't answer me if I asked something, but only in short, clipped words, and she never started conversations anymore. Her sketches stopped showing up on the fridge, and the plants that I'd watered while she was gone started to wilt, but it was like she didn't even notice. I started to worry that she might have gotten some bad news or that her trip to Bolivia had gone wrong somehow, but when I asked, Lyra said that she didn't want to talk about it. I figured my suspicions were correct and that whatever it was, she'd talk about it when and if she was ready to. I also figured it'd be a matter of days at most before Lyra started to feel better. But I was wrong, and things only got weirder. For as long as I'd known her, Lyra had always been a vegetarian. She was a great cook. She'd make stir-fries with peppers and tofu or big salads with nuts sprinkled on top. I'd regularly find bowls of fruit on the counter, mostly apples or mangoes, and I loved living with someone who shared my passion for healthy eating. But then, just less than 2 weeks after Lyra got back from her ayahuasca retreat, the raw beef started appearing. And the first time I saw some, I had almost a gaslight moment where I thought, I don't remember buying ground beef. And then, when I realized that it was Lyra's, I think I actually kind of gasped out loud. I asked her why the sudden change of heart, and I never forgot how flat her tone of voice sounded as she shrugged her shoulders and said, "Time for a change, I guess." I cannot stress how unlike Lyra that was, and by that time, I was really starting to worry about her. But then I saw how she ate it. She didn't cook the ground beef she bought. She ate it raw, with her hands. She developed this habit of doing it late at night, too, like this one time when I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. I was heading back to bed when I heard the creak of the fridge door coming from the apartment's kitchen and sitting area. It was almost 3 a.m., and when I peeked around the door, I saw the moon was kind of pouring through the blinds, turning the floor into this sort of grid of shadows. And there was Lyra, too, standing at the window, just staring up at the moon. I stood there watching her silently until she swayed slightly, and then I sort of bolted back to my room. And the next day, I once again asked if she was okay or if there was anything she wanted to talk about. But she told me what I'm now quite certain was a lie, and she said she was fine. I told myself that she even got so much as a tiny bit worse, I was probably going to try and get her family involved and organize some kind of intervention. And then the next thing I knew, the insects started appearing. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the kitchen making toast when I heard a crunch behind me and turned. Lyra was sitting at the table, a mason jar in front of her, and inside of it were live crickets. I watched in horror as she reached inside. The cricket's legs were scrabbling against the glass, and she plucked out one with her fingers and threw it into her mouth. I froze. There was a butter knife tight in my grip, with a wet, brittle sound making my stomach drop. I turned back to the counter and smeared the butter on my toast and then walked out like nothing had happened. But then, when it happened a second time, I couldn't ignore it. A few days later, it was beetles, these big, shiny black ones. I found her eating them, standing by the sink, and this time I gagged, the sound slipping out before I could stop it. She didn't react, she just kept eating, but when I demanded to know what had gotten into her, she swallowed what was in her mouth and started speaking. She told me that she learned a thing or two about herself down in Bolivia, and that she decided to make some changes. And if I didn't want to try out her new diet, that was fine, but I wasn't about to dictate what she could and could not eat in her own apartment. She didn't sound threatening or anything, but again, seeing Lyra act even remotely confrontational was so unlike her that it actually freaked me out. And before long, the apartment didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt like hers, like she'd claimed it. And her room started to stink, a very thick, earthy smell, like wet dirt and rot. And she stopped showering. Her hair was clumping into these greasy knots, and her clothes kind of hung off of her as she started to lose weight, too. I wanted to ask what happened down there, what she'd seen in that jungle, but every time I tried, something stopped me. I started locking my bedroom door. It was a very flimsy door, the kind that you could probably pop open with a credit card, but it made me feel just that little bit safer. I'd lie there, my phone under my pillow, listening to Lyra pacing around outside. Work became my lifeline. 8 hours at the coffee shop, steaming milk, wiping counters, and chatting with regulars who didn't know that my roommate was unraveling back home. Then, come the end of the day, I'd linger after my shift, nursing a cold latte and delaying the walk home, but I had to go back eventually. And when I did, there she'd be, sitting or standing by the window, and either waiting for or staring at the moon. The next thing I remember is how she started covering up all the mirrors one day. I came home to find every single one in the apartment draped with towels or turned to face the wall, and that was also the day that I found scratches on the bathroom door, these deep gouges like she'd been clawing at it with something. She vandalized her own sketchbooks too, the ones that she used to fill with all of her pretty drawings. Pages had been torn out or crumpled up, and the ones that remained were covered in these strange charcoal scribbles that creeped me out just to look at them. And that was the point that I realized that she needed help. Very urgent help, too, and the next day, once I got home from work, I was going to try and talk to her about getting some. If that didn't work, it was then time for Plan B, the intervention. But the horrible irony of all of this is that by the time I actually decided to act, it was already too late. The next evening, it was dark when I arrived home from work. Then, when I unlocked the door, I walked into the apartment, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was sort of this wet and coppery smell, heavier than the beef had ever been. The apartment was dark, so I figured no one was home, but when I flipped the light switch, there was Lyra, sitting in the middle of the TV room, or at least what was left of her. She was sitting cross-legged, our big kitchen knife in one hand, a flap of her own skin in the other. She'd peeled it back from her face, starting at her forehead, and had pulled it down, like a mask. She looked at me, the raw flesh of her forehead glistening as blood dripped onto her thighs. And then, with lips that were streaked with red, she told me, "I need to see who's underneath." I dropped my bag and ran, screaming as I went. I made it to my room, slammed the door, and then pressed my back against it after locking it. My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone. Then I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher what was happening. And as I spoke, I could hear her out there in the hallway. That knife sounded like it was scraping against something, and she was muttering louder and louder, and then it stopped, replaced by a low, keening sound, like she'd finally realized what she was doing, or had only now just started to feel the pain of what she'd done to her face. I slid down on the floor, my knees pulled up with my finger in one ear and the dispatcher in the other, and just waited. I was shaking, but thankfully the cops got there fast. I heard the front door burst open as a boot hit the frame, and then after the distinct sound of the two cops shouting some commands, I heard this feral, inhuman snarl before the slap, slap, slap of bare feet on hardwood floor. There was another shout, a command to stop, and then 2 shots, sharp and loud. The shots were terrifying, but the silence that hung in the air afterwards was somehow even worse. By the time I unlocked the door, 2 EMTs were zipping Lyra up into a bag. Her face, or what was left of it, was turned toward me with one eye still open, cloudy and still. One of the cops asked if I was okay. I nodded in the moment, but I wasn't. I was more shaken up than I'd ever been in my whole life. I didn't stay. I couldn't. I grabbed my keys and my phone and drove to my friend Mia's place across town. She opened the door in pajamas and took one look at me and pulled me inside. I crashed on her couch and then told her everything in bits and pieces. My friend didn't say much. She just gave me a hug and handed me a blanket and let me sleep after assuring me that everything would be fine. A few days later, once the cops finished with the scene, we went back to the apartment. Me, Mia, and her boyfriend in the latter's truck. And we packed all of my stuff up in under an hour, and the landlord didn't fight me when I broke the lease. He'd already seen the bloodstains on the hardwood. I live with Mia now. Her spare room is small, just a twin bed and a dresser, but it's mine. And sleep was very tough for a while. I'd have nightmares about Lyra, crickets and beetles crawling out of her open mouth before her whole face split open, and I'd wake up sweating, and then lie there till the sun came up, wondering what she saw in that jungle and what she brought back with her. The cops called it a psychotic break and blamed the ayahuasca. I read for myself that it happens sometimes, and I guess it does make sense. But there are times at night that I still keep the lights on, and I still lock my bedroom door, and I still check the mirror before I sleep just to make sure that it's still me looking back. Many of us encounter someone who just grabs our attention in a way that we can't explain. Like they know you from this or a previous life. I come from a long line of people who encountered ghosts, but I myself don't encounter the supernatural that much. I have in the past, but not often. Tonight, I know I did. This is not fake or made up. Our town is near a beach, and every 4th of July we go see the fireworks over the water. This year was no exception. Me and my wife arrived and set up chairs, settled in the sand, and chilled out waiting for darkness to fall and the fireworks to start. A slight breeze, a perfect, beautiful evening. About 20 minutes after we settled, I smelled a waft of what I can only describe as decayed roses on the breeze, like flowers in a vase that should have been thrown out a few days ago. It wasn't a bad smell, but just like sweet roses that weren't fresh. And then I saw her. From behind walked a young woman in jean shorts, t-shirt, and ball cap. She looked about 25 and had light brown wavy hair coming down about halfway on her back. I was immediately struck by her presence. Not because she was beautiful. I mean, she wasn't ugly. She was pretty, and she looked a bit off, though. Her face especially looked pretty, but weird, I suppose. Like her features didn't line up right or something. She stopped about 15 feet ahead of us and turned around. She looked right at me and smiled, then sat down in the sand. Again, she really did look off. Something was amiss. But I was enchanted by this young woman. I looked at my wife to see what she thought, but got zero reaction, like she didn't even see her. I smelled the decayed roses on the wind again. This young woman in jean shorts and ball cap sat down, took off her flip-flops, and looked to the sky. She was sitting perpendicular to us but facing away. When I thought about it more, two things struck me as very, very odd. She had no electronics, no cell phone. Everyone on the beach was taking selfies and playing with their phones, even the elderly. This young woman had no visible phone, no electronics. Also, her clothes looked straight out of the 1970s. I grew up in the 1970s, so I know what normal people look like back then, and she had that 70s look. Totally down to the tomboy jeans and really just everything about her. She seemed very content just sitting there looking at the sky and not worried about cell phones or beach chairs or anything. Again, I smelled sweet, decaying roses on the wind. I took a picture of the whole scene on my cell phone, the pretty sky, the beach, and the strange woman. Shortly after, she got up and walked away behind us. I looked around to see where she went, but she disappeared. She was gone. When I got home and looked at the picture, I actually was not surprised to see she didn't appear in it. You might think I would have freaked out, but at some spiritual level, I really didn't expect her image to show up. Just a green orb appeared where she was sitting in the sand. I'm calm about it because I could tell she meant no harm. I really believe she was a person who passed away back in the 70s, and she was just checking in on me for some reason. I'm racking my brain to try and remember if I knew a young woman who passed away when I was a child back then. I just can't put it together right now.
My mum was born in the year 1950, and she went to a religious college in Rexburg, Idaho. She was with some friends one night at her house. There were probably about 15 people there, and no one was drinking or doing hard drugs. They had just had dinner and were hanging out playing games. Someone brought out a Ouija board, and since this was years and years and years ago, no one really knew as much about them as we did today. So, a lot of people didn't know that they should have stayed away from it. My mum said she didn't participate, but she sat next to them and watched. I have to say, my mum told me this story many times and the details never changed, and she's not a person who'll make things up, so I have no reason to doubt this story's authenticity. So my mum's watching about 8 of the 15 people use the Ouija board. They're asking a lot of questions, and it's getting moved around. But with so many people, she didn't know if someone was moving it, or if it was real. There was a girl that my mum didn't know very well who was there, and she was getting really into the Ouija board. They knew there were certain kinds of questions they probably shouldn't ask, but this girl started asking really specific ones. They started out pretty innocent as Ouija boards can be, I suppose, and then the girl started asking questions about demons and wanting to see dead people and know the future. They're a bunch of religious people, so they were starting to get quite freaked out and wanted to stop. But the girl didn't want to stop, and asked a few more questions, which at this point I can't really recall what they were. But she refused to stop. They finally all convinced her that they needed to, right before they were able to say goodbye. She didn't ask a question, she said, and this is the part I'll never forget, "I want to see you." Before they could say goodbye, the planchette moved to yes. Everyone started losing it. They said goodbye and put the Ouija board away, and started playing charades to kind of lighten the mood. While the game was being played, the girl just happened to be sitting closest to the door. My mum said she was sitting on the other side of the room, where she was facing the door, so she would be face to face with this girl, but about 10 feet away. Someone knocked on the door, and since no one else was being expected, they all kind of froze. I think they were all a little freaked out by what had happened, especially the fact that this girl had gone really crazy and asked a bunch of scary questions. So after about 30 seconds of pausing, this girl gets up and goes to the door. She opens it, and for some reason the porch light is out. It hadn't been out earlier. My mum said from where she stood, she could see it looked like there was a dark shadow standing right outside the door on the porch. It was just a shadow to her. There were no facial features, there was no clothing. It looked like a black thing in the shape of a person standing there. Only a few people were facing the door, so most people had their back to it and didn't see what happened. The next thing my mum knows, this girl falls to the ground and passes out. Everyone's focused on her and no one noticed that the shadow had vanished. They called an ambulance, but the girl didn't make it. She had a heart attack. At least, that's what they were told. They were given information the girl's heart just stopped. My mum never had any other experiences, or saw anyone else play with them. I've also never touched a Ouija board. I don't believe for a second anything good can come from one. The demons speaking through it may seem kinda nice because they want to catch you off your guard, but their end goal is to possess you. Some can do it quicker than others. But just playing the game, you're allowing them to speak through you and open up yourself to them. Moral of the story, don't play with the Ouija board, and if someone pulls out, leave the house.
So before my dad came to North America, he was practicing to become a priest. In some cultures, it is widely believed that a priest should also learn about and perform exorcisms. It's a very old world thing, but still a very prevalent thing. My grandfather used to perform them, and so did my great-grandfather. My dad had told me some of his stories. They're pretty fascinating. I grew up in a heavy Catholic household, but I'm not very religious. I'd like to believe in ghosts, but I've never seen one. So naturally, when my dad told his stories, I was sort of skeptical. The one thing my dad likes to hammer in is that I take after him. He believes I have a gift like him. He used to tell me he was so successful with exorcisms because he has like a sixth sense and can feel, hear, and touch the supernatural. He can sort of understand them. I, on the other hand, can't do that. My weird gift is being able to dream about things vividly and have them happen soon right after. It feels like deja vu, but I know what is about to happen. I know it's more common than people think, so I don't really pay much mind to it. One day, when I was about 14, my dad received a phone call. It was an acquaintance who knew of my dad and his work back home. Mind you, my dad had now become a therapist, kind of the opposite of a priest in my mind, and hadn't done an exorcism in probably a decade that I know of. Side note, my dad has also been liberal with parenting. My mom was a nurse and always working, so we spent a lot of time with him, and between me and my two other sisters, it was a free-for-all. If my mom was there, she would have told my dad no way. So my dad takes the phone call, agrees to the job, and then looks at me. He announced I'll be joining because I have his gift, and wants me to understand what he does. Fine, I thought. And we pull up to this big house in a more affluent neighborhood in our city, and I already feel sick to my stomach. I can't explain the feeling. It's like the moment we drive into the driveway, I was nauseous and panicked. For no reason. It was a normal house, nothing out of the ordinary. I told my dad how I was feeling, and he quietly told me that we were going to go inside. There was a couple in their mid-40s that lived in that house. They had no children, just the both of them. The husband opened the door, and the first thing I noticed was the bags under his eyes. Second thing I noticed was that the house had no lights on inside. After we entered, I felt like the air in the house was being sucked out of my lungs. I don't know, like if you put your mouth to a low-setting vacuum. It was really weird, I know. I've never felt that way before. My dad sets up a little shrine in their living room and prayed to it. Then him and the husband went upstairs to see his wife. For some stupid reason, they left me alone downstairs in the den. So it's dark because their lights aren't on and I'm sitting on their couch. I suddenly feel like what would be fingers poking in my back, like viciously, like people with long fingernails just jabbing my back to get my attention. Now, I'm on a couch that is against the wall, so my deduction is, how can this even be happening? Naturally, I'm too afraid to look, so I just get up and walk straight out of the room without looking back. I walk into the kitchen and I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I feel as though there are people behind me, talking softly as not to disturb me. It sounds like two men and a woman are speaking, but my dad and the couple are upstairs and it doesn't sound like them anyways. I'm too scared to move and I just stare at the fridge for what seems like an eternity. My dad comes back downstairs after a while and I tell him what happened. He was sympathetic and told me to pray as he brought me back upstairs with him, and I was too scared to be left alone. He brings me into the master bedroom of the house and I see the wife for the first time. She looks small and fragile, laying in a 4-post king-size bed. The curtains are all drawn and the only light is coming from the candles my dad has lit. She doesn't acknowledge me. Her husband sits in a corner of the room, quiet. My dad places me in a chair next to the husband and we watch my dad together. He's praying over the wife's body and she suddenly sits up in bed, screaming. The curtains in the room all fly open at once, and my dad and whatever is left of this lady are just staring at each other, eye to eye. The husband, in a panic, basically scoops me up and carries me out of the room. I stand in the hallway as he goes back into his wife and my father. After seeing that, and experiencing what I did downstairs, I'm just trying not to absolutely soil my pants, and angry at my father for thinking it was a good idea to bring a kid to these. I don't feel alone in the hallway, so I basically just sit down on the ground and try to think of being somewhere else. My dad eventually comes out of the room and he doesn't talk. He doesn't really say anything to the husband, only whispered instructions, and we left. I didn't see the lady again after that. My mom was livid at my father that day for bringing me along. I mean, it was irresponsible, and I'd like to think of myself as less of a skeptic. To this day, I'm not even sure what I experienced myself. My dad hasn't done an exorcism since. My girl.
I've been looking forward to that camping trip for weeks. Myself, Craig, and Tanner, my buddies, had planned it out, nothing really fancy. It was really just supposed to be a night in the woods. We picked a spot in the middle of nowhere, out in Tennessee, somewhere deep in the backcountry where the trees were thick and the roads were complete dirt. And it was just us, our tent, some beers, and a fire. It was pretty simple, the kind of thing that we'd done 100 times growing up. I figured it would be a good time, and it was, until the morning. We got there late in the afternoon. The sun was already dropping down, and we set up camp quick, pitched the tent, gathered some wood, and got a fire going. The night was going smooth, and the woods were pretty quiet. We sat around, drinking and laughing, just sitting around the crackle of the fire, keeping us company. And it felt good to be out there, away from work and the noise of town. And when I woke up, the fire was just down to ashes, and the sky was gray, and we could see that early morning light coming in. Craig and Tanner were still out cold, so I crawled out of the tent, stretched my legs, and then figured that I'd get some coffee going. I walked over to my truck to grab the pot from the back, and that's when I saw it. There was a skin, some kind of animal skin, stretched out across the hood of my truck. It wasn't just tossed there. It was laid out flat, like someone had taken their time spreading it. The fur was gone, scraped completely off, and the underside was raw and pink, just glistening and wet. Blood streaked down the windshield, thick and dark and already starting to dry at the edges. I couldn't tell what it was. Maybe a deer, maybe something smaller. The head was gone and the legs were cut off and jagged like they'd been hacked with a dull blade. And it stank. That sour, meaty smell that gets in your nose and just stays there. And all I could do was freeze, just staring at it as my hands started to get all shaky. I looked around, half expecting someone to be standing there watching me, but the woods were dead still. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just me and that thing on my truck. I kicked the tent to wake Craig and Tanner. They stumbled out groggy, but when they saw it, their faces went white. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. Something was clearly very wrong. We tore down camp fast, threw everything in the back of the truck without folding it up. I grabbed a stick and pushed that skin off the hood. It hit the ground with a wet slap, and I didn't look at it again. We piled in, and I floored it down the road, tires kicking up dust, and the whole way I kept checking the rear view, like something might be chasing us. But there was nothing there, and I really couldn't shake that feeling, though. And we didn't talk about it much on the drive back. Craig kind of just stared out the window, and Tanner kept messing with his hands, picking at his nails, and I just focused on the road, trying to keep my mind blank and avoid whatever was back there. And when we got to town, we split up pretty quick. I went back home, washed the blood off of my truck with a hose, and stood there watching as the red kind of just swirled down the driveway. It really didn't feel real, but my gut wouldn't settle. And later that day, I started asking around to see if anyone knew anything. This guy, Mr. Harris, at the gas station gave me a look when I mentioned it, and he said that he'd heard stories of people finding skinned animals left in their cars or porches out in the deep woods. Said that it had been happening off and on for years. No one knew who did it, but folks figured it was some type of warning, a message for outsiders or people who didn't belong. Harris said he'd seen it himself once, way back in the 80s when he'd camped too far out. He woke up to, I guess, a skinned rabbit on his cooler and apparently never went back again. I didn't sleep much that night, and I just kept picturing that skin, the way it was stretched out all careful, and I eventually got online and started digging. I found posts for people all over, all the same stories, these skinned animals left in the night, always in these remote spots. Some said it was hunters gone crazy or pranksters, and others thought it was something older, something tied to the land. One guy swore that he'd seen figures moving in the trees after it happened to him, but he didn't stick around to find out more. And the more I read, the worse it got. People talked about feeling watched, hearing noises after they got home, like whatever did it wasn't done with them. And I told myself it was nothing, just some sick joke, maybe kids messing around, but I really couldn't shake it. And I don't know who did it or what they wanted. Maybe we'd crossed some line, camped somewhere we shouldn't have. Maybe it was random. But I know it wasn't an animal that skinned that thing and put it on my truck. I haven't been camping since, and I don't think I ever will. Craig and Tanner pretty much feel the same way. We haven't really talked about it much, but it's there, pretty much looming over us. And I still drive that truck, but every time I look at the hood, I still see that skin. I keep the doors locked now, and I don't know if it'll ever stop. All I know is that I ain't going back in those deep woods ever again. So this was the late summer in 1992, and I'd convinced my girlfriend Sarah to join me for a hike through the wilderness area up near Mount Rainier. We'd been dating for about a year, and she wasn't exactly the outdoorsy type, but she humored me. And the plan was simple: a day hike, maybe a 6 or 7 mile round trip through a dense stretch of forest that I'd read about in a guidebook. We packed light, just water, a couple of sandwiches, and a map, and then hit the trail just after sunrise. It started off easy, a dirt path cutting through towering trees. The air was cool and the sky was clear, and the forest was quiet except for us walking and the occasional chirp of a bird. We didn't talk much at first, just walked side by side, setting into the rhythm of it. And about an hour in, the trail got rougher. It narrowed, winding deeper into the woods where the trees grew closer together, and we crossed a small creek, stepping on slick stones to keep our feet dry, and I held Sarah's hand to steady her. She laughed when she almost slipped, a quick, nervous sound that we joked about afterwards, and it was a huge relief to see her start to enjoy herself. Then, around noon, we stopped for a break, sitting on a fallen log to eat our sandwiches. After lunch, the trail climbed this very gentle slope, and the woods opened up a little bit with fewer trees and more underbrush. We'd been walking maybe 3 or 4 hours total when Sarah started lagging behind. I slowed down, waiting for her to catch up. She gave me this kind of defiant look, like she wouldn't admit that she was tired, and I just smiled and told her that we turned back, and then, seconds later, she saw it. We were maybe 10 yards apart, me up ahead, her trailing behind when she stopped dead. I didn't notice at first, but just kept walking. And then I heard her voice, sharp and low, barely above a whisper. "Oh my God." I turned around, afraid that I was about to see her pointing at a bear or maybe a snake or something, because she was frozen, staring off to her left with the color having drained from her face. I followed her gaze, and my jaw dropped. There, about 20 feet off the trail, was a tree. It was a big one, maybe 3 feet thick, and halfway up its trunk, at around chest height, was a deer. It wasn't just any deer either. It was a full-grown buck, antlers and all, and its body was just stuck in the tree. The front half hung out one side, head kind of hanging down, eyes glassy and just blank, while the back half stuck out the other side, its hind legs dangling limp. And just to make this 100% clear, it wasn't hanging from a branch or caught in a fork. It was inside the tree, like embedded in it, almost like the trunk had grown around it. I took a step closer, but Sarah grabbed my arm so tight it hurt a little. "What the hell is that?" she said, her voice shaky. I didn't answer because I didn't know. The tree definitely wasn't broken in any way, and there was no splintered bark, no jagged edges where the deer's body met the trunk, and the wood looked smooth, untouched and natural, like it had grown that way. But that was impossible. Trees don't grow around something that fast, and this deer wasn't some ancient skeleton. It looked fresh, barely starting to rot. There were a couple of flies buzzing around its head, but that was it. No stench, no maggots. There was no blood, no torn flesh, nothing to suggest violence. It was just there, almost fused with the wood in a way that made exactly 0 sense to me and Sarah. Sarah stayed there where she was. Her grip was tightening around my arm. "I don't like this," she said. But I felt this pull, this need to figure this out. I took another step, then another, until I was close enough to touch the tree if I wanted, and something about it made my skin crawl, even as my brain kept prodding at it, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe the deer had fallen from somewhere high up and landed just right, but there were no cliffs nearby, no broken branches above, and the trunk was too solid, too intact. I crouched down, peering up at where the deer's body met the wood. The bark flowed around it seamlessly, like the tree had molded itself to the shape of the carcass. I reached out and hesitated and then brushed my fingers against the trunk just below the deer. It felt normal. There was nothing strange until you looked up and saw that impossible thing sticking out of it. Sarah yelled my name, telling me to get back, but I couldn't stop myself. I stood up and walked around to the other side. There, the deer's hindquarters hung limp, and I saw the same thing there too. No blood, no damage to its hide, no sign whatsoever of how it got that way. And that's when curiosity started to turn to fear. My stomach tightened, not from nausea, but from something deeper, something I still can't put into words. It wasn't just weird anymore, it felt very wrong. The woods felt quiet too, like everything had just stopped and started watching us. No birds or wind, just the sound of my own breathing and Sarah's quick, shallow gasp behind me. I looked at her, and her eyes were wide and her lips were pressed very tightly. "We need to go," she said. And at that point I didn't argue. I could remove myself physically, but mentally I couldn't pull away from this. How long had it been up there? Had someone or something put it there? The unease crept up my spine, slow at first and then all at once, like a cold hand closing around my neck. I thought about pictures I'd seen of animals caught in fences or traps, but this wasn't that. This was deliberate, unnatural, and the more I looked, the more I felt like we weren't supposed to see it. Neither of us looked back, but I didn't need to. I could still see it, just burned into my brain. We moved in silence, our steps quick and uneven as my heart was pounding, not from the pace, but from thoughts of what we'd just seen. Sarah kept her head down, and I knew she felt it too. That shift from curiosity to dread, the sense that we'd stumbled onto something that we weren't built to understand. We made it back to my car in almost half the time that it took to hike out, and the whole drive home we didn't say a word to each other. And when we got to her place, she looked at me and her face was still pale, saying, "We're not talking about this ever again." And I agreed. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I didn't want to upset her any more than she already was. And we never did mention it, not to each other and not to anyone. But there are definitely times late at night that I'll see that deer in my mind, half in and half out of that tree, and feel that same cold grip around my neck reminding me that was all real.
Me and my friends Selena and Martha, Selena's sister Jasmine, and our common friend Emma. We are 5 in a group. One night at 7:30 p.m., we all decided to have a party at my house. My parents had gone out for an important meeting and would not return until the next day. All of us had decided to have fun. Martha had brought a Ouija board along with her. I asked her, "Why have you brought this with you?" To which she replied, "We must include them in our party as well." We partied hard, and then at 12 a.m., we decided to play with the Ouija board. We placed the board on a table and lighted some candles. Selena started the session. "Is anyone there who would like to communicate with us?" Selena asked. There was no reply. Selena spoke again. "Don't hesitate to talk." Again, there was no reply. We got bored after asking 21 times and decided to watch TV instead. As the girls had to stay in my house for the night, they went to change their clothes. When it was finally Martha's turn to change, she went to the washroom. Suddenly, we heard Martha scream and we rushed to see what had happened. Martha was crying, and she said, "I just now saw myself walking across the washroom." At first, we didn't understand what she meant, and we thought that she was trying to scare us. But then, she showed us a scratch mark on her arm, which was not possible for her to make. We then thought to ask the Ouija board again. This time, I decided to ask the questions. "If anybody is here, please tell us. Is anybody there?" Strangely, this time, the board decided to answer back. "Yes." "Who are you?" The board pointed to the letter D. "D who?" The board slowly spelt out the word, "Death." "What do you want from us?" "Blood. Your flesh as well," the board answered. And this was enough for us. We all left everything and ran towards the door, but the door did not open, and we realized that we had been locked in my own house. Some more supernatural things started happening. The lights were flickering, and things were being thrown here and there. We somehow managed to hide in one of the rooms, but to no avail. Martha got very angry, and she asked with a loud scream, "Why don't you leave us alone?" To which the Ouija replied, "Your screams make me powerful." Selena, in frustration, burned the Ouija board with a gas cylinder. The moment the Ouija board was burned, the front door opened with a loud noise, and without wasting any time, we ran out of the house. But the thing that happened after that is the most horrible part of the story. We all got out, but when Martha was about to step out the door slammed shut. For a second, everything was dead silent, but after that, we heard her screams from the inside. We banged on the door and called out her name. After some time, our neighbors came and we managed to break down the door. We found Martha lying unconscious on the floor. We took her to a hospital. After that day, Martha never spoke a word again. Later, we found that the spirit whom we had called through the Ouija board was David, who was Selena's half-brother. He died due to an accident. David was never good when he was alive, or dead. Martha was admitted to an insane asylum, and even today we don't know what exactly happened on that night. But whenever I look into her eyes, I get shivers all around my body, and I feel something horrible had happened. My family and I ended up moving from that house. Looking back, I have to ask myself the question, why did we do that? Because all of our lives have changed. I still feel a bad presence around me.